Hello again, and welcome to Sampler Wars, MPC versus Deluge. This is part 2 of this comparison, so if you haven't already, I highly recommend you watch the previous video before jumping into this one. If you're already a subscriber, huge welcome back, and thank you so much for your ongoing support. As always, I hope I make every minute you spend here worth your time. If this is your first time here, it's great to meet you. Please make yourself at home, and I hope we'll continue to see each other for years to come. So without further ado, hi, welcome to the midlifesynthesist. Let's get started. Internal synth engines. A few years ago, if you would have asked me about the internal synths on the MPC, my answer would have been, they're pretty okay. Now, however, after the addition of its new engines, I'd have to say they're downright awesome. The sheer amount of sonic variety and the amount of options for sound design in each engine is nothing short of amazing, and I tip my hat to Akai that they were even able to cram so much into these machines and keep things so stable to boot. But that does come at a price though. You are limited in the amount of synths you can have running at the same time in standalone mode. That goes for each individual synth engine, as well as for the total number of synth tracks available. And that's where the Deluge has the upper hand, because even though the Deluge only has a virtual analog engine and an FM synth engine, its killer feature is that you can have as many synth tracks as you want until the CPU starts to catch on fire. The more complex the patches and the more effects you put on them, the faster the Deluge will start to choke. But how about the sound? Well, that's a bit subjective, as beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but I'm pretty confident in saying that the MPC does have better sounding synths at this point in time. At the very least, it offers you more synth engines to choose from. That should not be mistaken for me saying that the Deluge has a bad synth engine at all. Far from it, actually. Even though the factory presets are decidedly underwhelming, there are people out there who have truly made this thing sing. And if you want a taste of what this thing can do in the right hands, look for Boards of Deluge right here on YouTube to hear the mind-blowing presets that Mr. Stiplowski is able to squeeze out of the Deluge. I wouldn't fret much on whether you love the internal synths or not though, because there's a feature on both of these machines that is absolutely killer, and that is the ability to transform any synth track into a MIDI track to control external synths. So in actual use, I find I most enjoy using either one of them as rough drawing boards that you can take anywhere with you, and then when you get home, you can start assigning all of those parts to bigger and better real synths. That to me has been the main appeal of these boxes, as they don't constrain you to just what's available inside them, but they are expandable through MIDI, which brings us nicely into my next point. MIDI masterminds. To be honest, for my purposes at least, MIDI integration for controlling other synths is a solid tie between these two. You can easily configure both of them to control and sequence a buttload of external gear with little hassle. As to the clock and stability, in my experience at least, they are both equally stable and reliable. I'm happy to report that I've had no problems with latency, and both can act as hubs for other MIDI controllers. And besides the original MPC Live, all of them have CV outputs. Where the MPC does outshine the Deluge is its ability to also act as a MIDI controller for Ableton Live. Also, while on the subject of connectivity, MPCs are now able to hook up to audio interfaces to further expand their IOs up to 32 ins and outs, as well as being able to control external gear through USB. So at least until Synthstrom decides to incorporate that into the Deluge, which believe me, could always be possible with those New Zealand wizards, the MPC wins for now. Portability, battery life. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you might be familiar with an infamous MPC Live 2 video that I did a while back, where I tried to point out that maybe the MPC Live 2 isn't for everyone. Apparently, I seem to have focused a lot on the fact that the MPC Live is pretty bulky and heavy, which for some reason led many people in the comments section to recommend that I seek professional help and join a gym. Anyway, I stand by my point that the MPC, while being perfectly transportable and sturdy, it is something that you will notice on your commute, especially if you take it with you in a protective case. Just to be clear here, I'm not saying that it's unbearably heavy. I'm just saying that it's not something that you will want to take with you casually. That's not at all the case with the Deluge. The Deluge, aside from being considerably smaller, it's insanely light, and I find myself taking it with me just in case, as opposed to the MPC, which I take only if I absolutely know that I'll be using it at some point. Both seem very well built and sturdy, though I fear more for the safety of the MPC in my backpack since it has a huge and very scratchable touchscreen. Hence, I have a screen protector and a special case for it. The Deluge, on the other hand, is perfectly comfortable in this very stylish and manly laptop purse. As for battery life, both of these last quite a fair bit depending on use intensity. None of these 2 is anywhere close to the near immortality of the OP1's battery life, and the MPC does tend to tap out sooner than the Deluge, but if you start the day off with a full charge and you intend to be jamming just every now and then in your downtime at your day job, you should be okay with either of these until you get home. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, I would really appreciate it if you could take a second and click that like button, because it helps YouTube know that I'm not wasting your time, and hopefully gets this information out to people who are going insane just trying to decide which groove box to get. Together, we can help them. So don't do it for me, do it for them. Thanks. So even though I feel that the MPC is superior to the Deluge in the sampling department, if there's one aspect where the Deluge absolutely destroys the MPC, that would have to be the live looping department. The looper on the MPC feels like it was an afterthought, something they tacked on at the last minute to say, yeah, this thing has a looper. But in actual use, the looper on the MPC is disjointed and detached from the rest of the system and the workflow. I can live without disk streaming on the MPC, but if there's one thing that would make it the machine to rule all, it would be an updated looper that felt like you could actually use it in a live situation. The Deluge, on the other hand, is a looping beast. I won't spare any praise for the Deluge here. It is one of my favorite looping devices ever, bar none. The flexibility and power of this thing make for a truly creative space where you can just let loose and ride the wave as you overdub, add new layers, and start tweaking your tracks on the fly. Having an integrated microphone is also a crucial part of this, and sketching out multi-layered ideas on the fly and mangling my tracks and adding effects is some of the most fun I've ever had making music. My only criticism is the lack of more audio inputs, but you can't have everything in life, can you? As for the effects available on both of these machines, I'd say that there are two aspects to consider. One is quantity and quality of the effects, and the other is actual practical application of these effects. After many updates, its effects roster is something Akai can be absolutely proud of. Most are adequate, while some are just insanely good. You can process external audio live as well. However, in a test that I made a few weeks ago, I found out that the easiest way to choke the MPC's CPU was by going to town on the effects. So while you do have them available, you should be strategic with how you assign them and how many you use. That brings me to the practical application aspect of the effects. The Deluge has less effects, but once again, it takes a page out of the SP404 playbook to put these effects at your fingertips quickly and intuitively. Where on the MPC, you can jam with the effects with the XY feature, and you can always turn them on and off and pad track and mute, etc. I always find that I wish I had more quick live control over them, and maybe more access to a few more parameters. On the Deluge, though there are fewer effects, I always feel that I can play them and actually use them to creative effect while improvising to make a track feel more alive and get unexpected results. In the previous video, I asked you to tell me what you wanted to know about these two groove boxes, and I've tried my best to answer most of your questions in this video series. However, there are a few quick topics that you brought up that I would like to address, so in this last segment, I'm going to do a short Q&A fire round. So here goes. Kawako Paco asks about the differences when creating everything from scratch. For example, he says, I have a guitar and one of these two machines. Which one is more flexible? In that scenario, if I wanted to start jamming on the fly and get creative with live audio looping and overdubbing on a guitar, nothing can beat the immediacy of the Deluge. As I said before, its looper is powerful and flexible, as well as having Octatrack-esque on-the-fly live audio mangling capabilities. However, if you wanted to create guitar samples and slice them and dice them to create a song in a music production scenario, then I'd argue that maybe the MPC would ultimately give you more options to work with at the end of the day. So I'd say Deluge for immediacy and creation, MPC for production and sample manipulation. Tricks and Tips asks, how about the workflow after the box? As in, how would you go about exporting your songs to a DAW for final production and mastering? Well, if you're an Ableton user, the MPC is your best friend. It supports the Explode and Export feature, where you can simply transfer all of your tracks onto an Ableton project with little to no hassle. MPC Beats, the VST version of your MPC's operating system, can be run inside your preferred DAW as a plugin, so integration really doesn't get much better than that. On the Deluge, exporting your project can be done, but it's a bit fussier, as you would have to do it by hand, so to speak. There is a third-party workaround which enables you to sync your Deluge MIDI tracks to Ableton, but it does require you to buy a Wi-Fi SD card. Will White asks, Which one maxes out the CPU faster? In all honesty, both feel pretty adequate in the CPU department, as long as you respect the fact that they both have limitations and are not full-on DAWs. But this goes for pretty much any groovebox that does as much as these two do. In my experience, both the MPC and the Deluge seem to be well optimized, but will both start showing signs of struggle in heavily packed projects, especially when using and abusing the onboard effects. Even though I do perceive the MPC as a bit more powerful in regards to the hardware and overall power, I would hesitate to really pick out one over the other as a real winner here, as it mostly depends on how you use them. But I will say that I have found both systems to be very reliable and stable on the whole, especially for live performance. As to the subject of live performance, Homo Superior asks, which one is best for it? I would argue that mostly depends on what kind of live performer you want to be. If you are a finger drumming master and want to perform live multiple parts of sample and synth MIDI tracks as you go along, the MPC is second to none. If, however, you want a more experimental performance where you already have your tracks ready and set up, but start messing around with them on the fly while also being able to freely live audio loop and mangle as you add layers, I'd go for the Deluge. In closing, my final verdict on this sampler war once again will not be decided on which one of these devices is better than the other. Both will make amazing MIDI brains for a larger setup. Both offer portability and power in a self-contained box. Both will get you very close to a finished track before needing to take things to a DAW. The winner of this match will ultimately depend on who you are and what you're looking for in this point in your musical journey. If you're looking for a top-of-the-line sample slicing and dicing, mangling experience, are okay with a touchscreen, and have experience or want to learn finger drumming, the MPC is the box you're looking for. If, on the other hand, you're looking for an extensive drawing board where you can make intricate and complex sequences, both percussive and melodic, where you can let your imagination run loose and get back in touch with the very essence of music making, well, then maybe the Deluge is what you've been missing all of your life. Rest assured, both offer some of the most fun times I've ever had making music in my life, and I would not hesitate to recommend either of them to anyone with an interest in music production. As with any of these devices, you won't really know until you have one in your hands if things will actually click or not. What I've attempted to do in this video is to hopefully point you in the right direction. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video useful, or at least entertaining. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.